Performance comes down to controlling what you can. For tennis pro, Jessica Pegula, that means starting with the air around her. She can't control her opponent or the match, but she can control her rest and recovery. That's why she's trusted Blue Air for 5 years and counting. Blue Signature air purifiers are engineered to perform and designed to impress, with 7 stages of advanced filtration, up to 10 times more odor removal, and customizable colors and accessories. Shop BlueAir.com and use code SIGNATURE30 to save.
Bubba Wallace here from 2311 Racing. You know what's slower than a pace car? Waiting at the car wash. That's when I fire up Chumba Casino. It turns those slow minutes into fast fun. With new games every week, you'll never get bored. Next time you're stuck in the slow lane, speed up with Chumba. Play now at ChumbaCasino.com. Let's Chumba.
Sponsored by Chumba Casino. No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
There are heroes and there are legends. Heroes come and go. Legends never die. We usually say that you cannot become a legend before death. These are living legends. If the legends fall silent, who will teach the children of our ways? Sun Coaches Podcast, Season 5, brought to you by Titan Sensor, is proud to present The Legends. Sun Coaches is proud to partner with Titan Sports for the next 4 seasons on Sun Coaches Podcast. Titan GPS delivers technological superiority and improved player performance through wearable GPS made for high school football and strength and conditioning. From speed training to athlete recruit to workload enhancement, Titan is the easy-to-use yet comprehensive GPS tool to get it done. There's no minimum to get started, and Titan will walk you through every step to success. Message us on X at Titan Sensor to learn more and get in touch. Welcome to Sun Coaches Podcast, Season 5, and our guest today just got named, elected, nominated into the National High School Football Hall of Fame and has done something that no other coach in the state of Georgia has ever done, and that's win a state championship at 3 different high schools. Coach Jeff Herron, thanks for being on with me today.
No problem, Chris. Glad to do it.
Well, Coach, I know that you grew up in Virginia. I usually ask people where they grow up, and what was that like? So you're actually from Virginia, correct?
That is correct. Born in Kingsport, Tennessee, but that's because that's where the hospital was. But my home was in Gate City, Virginia. And, that's where I got my start loving football and growing up in that community.
Did you have brothers and sisters, or were you the only child, or were there 100 of y'all? Or
no, Chris, I'm an only child. And
okay.
My mom had some difficulty and had some miscarriages before I was born. And, so they just, they didn't really try after they had me, I guess. But, that has its advantages, has its disadvantages, I guess. I had a really good childhood, good parents, and I can't complain at all about any of that.
So when you grew up playing sports in school, did you play everything or did you just play football?
Well, I started out playing everything, no question. But my football was the main thing in Gate City, and we were extremely successful. My high school coach was the winningest coach in Virginia history when he retired, and I just loved everything about it. I remember going to my first high school football game when I was probably 6 years old. And, I saw a video the other day. There was a YouTube video on one of our games, and we were playing away 3 hours away, first round playoff game. And stadium was just completely packed, on our side. And so, it was a big deal to play football. Now, again, I played baseball, basketball. But when I got to high school, I got cut from the baseball team, and I knew I would get cut from basketball if I went out probably. And so I kind of focused on track and football. And, my football coaches were our track coaches. It was just kind of a natural fit. And I started out as a miler. In the first meet, I almost got lapped. And I told my coach, I said, that's me, buddy. And he said, well, try pole vault. So I did that for a while. And was just decent at best, decent, and finally became a hurdler, and that was kind of my thing. And I was a decent intermediate hurdler. In Virginia, the lower classifications ran low hurdles, and I was pretty good at that because I didn't have a lot of height. But anyway, between track and football, that was pretty much it for me.
Well, you knew in track you weren't going to get cut since your football coaches were the coaches.
Yeah, they didn't cut anybody. They just ran us to death. So.
Well, what position did you play? You were quarterback, weren't you?
Well, I was, and but I got beat out. Ironically, felt like that I was the guy going into my junior year. And that summer, playing baseball, in fact, it was kind of my last organized baseball. I was having a really good summer. I was felt like I was kind of finally getting it and becoming a pretty good hitter. And I got a hit and tried to stretch it into a double and slid into second base and dislocated my shoulder 2 weeks before we started practice for football. And so by the time I got back, another young man had taken over the position and did real well. And he was in the same class as me. So he was our quarterback my junior and senior year. And I wound up being a corner. And then when I went to college, I played corner for 4 years there. And so, it worked out good for me because I learned a lot more about defense, I guess. And that's kind of where I started as a secondary coach.
So where did you play college football at?
I played at Emory and Henry University, which, we weren't very good. And, that was tough because, I came from a really good high school program that we lost 5 games in my 4 years. And get to Emory and Henry, and we lost 5 games in 5 weeks. So it was a difficult learning experience, but it was a learning experience. And because we weren't very good, I wound up. I had a senior start at corner the first game. There was another senior started the second game, but by the third game, I had become the starter and started the rest of my career. So, it was good for me because if I'd gone to someplace that was better, that would have never happened, for sure. So, it was a great experience, both of them. And, certainly the coaches and, my teammates in high school and college, certainly that made my desire to get into coaching. There's no question.
Yeah, I was about to ask. I ask people all the time when they went to college, did they know they were going to coach, or did they go to be an accountant and just got in the wrong line?
Well, I did a podcast a few nights ago, and my son, one of my sons, afterwards, he goes, "You tell them about how you wanted to be a pharmacist." And I said, "Well, no, I left that part out, I guess." But since you asked, when I went to Emory, I wanted to. I wanted to be a pharmacist, so I was in the pre-med program, and that didn't go real well. And after almost flunking out my freshman year, I said, I love coaching that part. I want to do that. And so I decided. I had a great history teacher my freshman year in college. And I said, that's what I want to do. I want to teach history. I love it. That's what I want to do. And then somewhere along the line, I decided that I would enjoy being in the gym playing more than I would in the classroom. And so I switched to PE. But I knew I wanted to coach. I knew that from my freshman year in college on. I was convinced that's what I wanted to do.
So what was your first job out of college?
Well, when I graduated, I told this story the other night. I wanted to be a college football coach, and that was, I loved Bear Bryant. I loved Woody Hayes. That was just, back in those days, the teams that were always winning, that's who I was pulling for, seemed like. But that's what I wanted to do. And so I must have written over Christmas break, my senior year in college. I probably, wrote 200 letters and sent them to.
What's up, Uso? Main event Jey Uso here from the WWE. When it's just me between matches, it's day one-ish. And that means it's Chumba time. With hundreds of casino-style games and new titles arriving weekly, there's always something fresh to try at Chumba Casino. The daily boosts make it even more fun. And have me about to get them all during my downtime. Ready for a fun way to chill out and enjoy a few minutes for yourself? Let's Chumba.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. See T's and C's. 21 plus. Sponsored by Chumba Casino.
Every college that I could think of, and got zero responses. Nobody replied back. And but when I went back after Christmas, there was a coach on our staff. He'd only been there that 1 year, but I was telling one of my coaches, I said, I really want to get into college, but I don't know how. And the guy said, well, he said, you can become a graduate assistant somewhere. And I said, I know, I've been writing these letters, but nobody's, giving me that opportunity. He goes, well, I know somebody. And he called Tennessee Tech, where he had coached recently, and set up an interview for me. And I drove down and interviewed with the head coach. And, it wasn't much of an interview. There was a coach on their staff that had played at Emory and Henry, and several years earlier. But they just kind of took me in the first day I got there, and he nicknamed me the Virginian from the Western TV show. And he said, "Yeah, you want to do it? We'll hire you." And I think I made Chris. I think my paycheck was $145 a month, and needless to say, I had to take a loan out just to pay my rent while I was there. But they were paying for my graduate school. And so anyway, I go to Tennessee Tech, and, my main two jobs were, I ran the scout team. I ran the offensive scout team for them. But other than that, the only things I really did was I went to swap film, where we had to drive. I'd get in a car and I'd drive to the Nashville airport and get films as they came off a plane. Drive up the mountain, whatever, and did that and went and got lunch every day. And that was about the extent of my coaching that year. But ironically, my head coach, a guy named Don Wade, his son Clint was a high school coach in Georgia for a long time, good friend. But Coach Wade was really good. But he and the AD did not agree. They didn't want him to recruit out of the state of Tennessee. Well, there's not that many great players in Tennessee, to go around. And so there was some bad blood there. And he wound up getting let go right after our last game of the season. And, that night, now that shook me, because I remember we were sitting down there on Sunday night waiting on Coach Wade to come in. He told us we were going to meet, and everybody's just sitting around and wondering what's going on. He walks in, and, I don't want to cuss here, but I'll say exactly what he said. He goes, they told me that they wanted me to resign, and I told them I wasn't. I said, if you want me to resign, you're going to have to fire me. And said the AD said, okay, you're fired. And so I remember when he told that, the other coaches sitting in that little small cramped area that we had, just the look on their faces, I didn't know what it meant, but most of them had been there with him, and he'd been there 16 years, and most of them had been there with him the whole time. And all of a sudden, they were just out of jobs, and most of them never worked again in coaching. So, that kind of shook me up, and, I still wanted to be a college coach, and they hired a new guy, and his name was Gary Darnell. He came from Kansas State. Well, I waited 3 weeks to see the man, and they wouldn't let me in. He wouldn't see me, whatever you want to call it. But 3 weeks, I went every day to his office, and I'd just sit there, and they would finally say, well, he can't see you today. And I finally, one day, I told the secretary, I knew her from the previous, coach, and I just said, look, ma'am, I said, I got to talk to him. I said, I'm not going to leave today. I said, I'm going to wait till he's done, and whatever. And so I got in to see him. And he just looked up at me when I walked in. He was writing on his desk, and he just glanced up and he goes, "What position you play?" I said, "Well, sir, I don't play a position. I was a grad assistant last year, and I'd like to do that again." And he looked at me again. He goes, "I got my own people," and that was the extent of it. So I was fired, unemployed, with 4 months of a seasoned college coach, and so I started scrambling, trying to find where to go and what to do, and I had some options to go to some colleges, but one of them was in Vermont. One of them was living in a dorm in Maryville, and I just, those didn't sound great. And so I was going to go back to my hometown, to that area, and take a high school job. And I'm in the gym playing basketball, and Jimmy Dorsey, who had gone to Tennessee Tech, played football there, he walked in with one of my professors, and they called me over. And I mean, I'm sweating like crazy, everything. And I go over, and Jimmy introduces himself, and he said, I'm up here looking for coaches. And he said, "Dr. Johnston here says you would be a good one for me." And he goes, "I want to know if you could be willing to come and talk to my principal in a few minutes." And I said, "Well, could I run home and take a shower?" He goes, "Yeah, we got time for that." So I ran home, jumped in the shower, put on the nicest clothes I had, which weren't very nice, but came running in, and went to the room they were in. I sit down, and the first thing the principal said to me, he said, "Coach, just what do you know about Dallas?" And I literally looked at him, and I looked at Jimmy, and I said, I thought you guys were from Georgia. I said, I'm not really interested in moving to Texas. And they both started laughing, and one thing led to another, and I wound up joining Coach Dorsey's staff at Paulding County High School in Dallas, Georgia in the fall of 1983, I guess, was my first year.
That's awesome. I know Ken Kofer played for y'all, I think. Played for Coach Dorsey at Paulding. I had him on, and
Ken was actually, he held the chains. He was on the chain crew, I think, when I was there. But I was only there 1 year, and Coach Dorsey was only there one more year. So
where did you go after that?
Well, Coach Dorsey, he got offered the job at McEachern.
Right.
I don't know if he'd want me telling this, but they offered it to Ray Broadway first. I don't know if you remember that name. But
I love Coach Broadway, and the crowd goes wild.
Yeah, and so they offered it to Coach Broadway. And Coach Broadway eventually, turned it down because McEachern was really bad. And so then they offered it to Coach Dorsey, but he knew he was the second choice. Well, he didn't want to go. His pride was telling him not to go. And I was looking at their facilities, compared to Paulding County, and it was closer to where he and I both lived. And I rode to school with him every day. And so I just kept trying my best to talk him into going. And eventually he did. And he asked me to come with him. And he couldn't talk anybody that was any good into going with him. And wound up asking me to be his defensive coordinator. And I said, Coach, I don't know if I'm ready for that. He goes, well, I can teach it. And he did. And so I was there with him as an assistant for 5 years as his defensive coordinator. We had 5 great years and learned so much. I mean, he was great. I mean, Jimmy's like my second father. And he taught me so much. And then, 5 years later, I got the head coaching job at Walton High School.
So that was your first head coaching job?
It was.
And what was that like? I always ask people, because I know most of the time you guys say that your first head coaching job is like trying to drink out of a fire hydrant.
Well, yeah, I was drowning for sure. But, I told this the other night. I am, this weekend when that Hall of Fame thing got announced, whatever, I talked to 4 different guys that were seniors on that team that reached out to me. And I am still close to a bunch of those I say kids. They're 40-year-old men now.
Hello, it is Ryan, and I was on a flight the other day playing one of my favorite social spin slot games on ChumbaCasino.com. I looked over at the person sitting next to me, and you know what they were doing? They were also playing Chumba Casino. Everybody's loving having fun with it. Chumba Casino is home to hundreds of casino-style games that you can play for free anytime, anywhere. So sign up now at ChumbaCasino.com to claim your free welcome bonus. That's ChumbaCasino.com and live the Chumba life.
Sponsored by Chumba Casino.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
Or older, I guess. But they were so patient with me, and they were so willing to put up with my lack of knowledge. And, we got beat in the opening game by Brookwood, who was the North Georgia champions from the year before, back when we had a North and South champion. And we played Brookwood in the opening game and got beat. The second week, we played Wheeler in the opening game, or second game, and got beat. And so my career, I started 0-2. And then we won 2. And then the fifth game, and I know this story is going to be hard to believe, but we were playing Sprayberry at home, and we were up 20-7 and had the ball first and goal on the 4-yard line with 5 minutes left in the game. And we got beat 27-20.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, it was, the wheels came off the bus. And on top of that, we lost one of our best defensive players to a season-ending knee injury, a senior that night. And he was a defensive end. And on the other side, the other defensive end got in a car accident that night and, almost died, and, had really severe leg injury that got infected. And so he was in the hospital the rest of the season. And we were, not sure he was going to make it. And, it just, when that game was over, I remember just sitting up all night. And I was sitting on the stairs in our house that went to our upstairs bedroom, and my wife was asleep. And, when I got home from the game, I was walking up the steps, and it was like I just almost collapsed. And I just sit there, and I was just like, I'm a very religious person. But that night, I questioned my faith. I was asking, God, why did you put me in this situation? I'm not any good at this. And I literally was just ready to give up coaching. I'd already decided at the end of the year that I was probably going to quit and go run a boat dock for my father-in-law in Tennessee. And but we go to practice on Monday. It was awful. They were practicing terrible. I got mad, and I told them to go home. I said, look, I can't coach you if you're not going to, yes, we blew it, but we can't, this can't be the way we end the year. I said, just go home. And I said, if you're serious, you come back tomorrow. Well, they came back the next day, and those seniors just kind of took over, and we won, 7 straight, got in the playoffs, beat Eric Zier and Marietta in the opening round of the playoffs. They were undefeated, and it was a huge win, and then wound up getting beat the next week by Wheeler again. But that just kind of, that group of kids turned things around for me. But I was a terrible head coach that first year. You think you think you're ready for it, but there's just no way. The things that you run into. When we lost the first game, the parents had told me they were going to feed us on Sunday. It was tradition. They would bring food up when we had our coaches meeting. So we're all sitting around waiting, we'd met and we're waiting on the food, and doesn't show up. And I called the lady that was in charge of it. And she said, well, you're not getting any food this week. I said, well, what's the deal? She goes, you didn't let my son run the ball enough.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, you're not prepared for those kind of things. Those things don't, our quarterback, a young man named Keith Grunwald, who was a phenomenal player. Keith actually got drafted in the second round by the Detroit Tigers. He was a baseball, football guy. He had offers to go to college and play both, but he chose to go to North Carolina to play baseball. Then he got drafted in the second round and wound up, I think he stayed at North Carolina and then got in the minor leagues for a while. But anyway, that summer, Keith was going to play with East Cobb baseball. And, I didn't know any better. I didn't know who the kid was, how good he was, whatever. And his parents came in and told me, said, well, he won't be back until y'all have been practicing for 3 weeks and then he'll get back from the World Series, whatever. And I just looked at him and I said, well, that ain't going to work. I said, if he ain't here the first day of practice, he ain't going to play. And I look back at that now going, that might have been the stupidest thing ever came out of my mouth. But luckily, they had him there the first day of practice. And, I would never have done that later in my career. I just didn't know any better. And, Keith turned out to be great. And he called me the other day and, he was a heck of a player for us. But I almost made a major mistake right there. So that first year was definitely a learning experience.
How long were you at Walton?
Well, I was there 1 year. And, yeah, Chris, and that, it was one of the hardest decisions I ever made. And I look back at it, I don't know if it was a good decision, but, Jimmy had done a fantastic job at McEachern. Walton had been very good while we were at McEachern, other Cobb County teams, but nobody had ever won a state championship. And I remember telling my wife and telling Jimmy, I was like, I don't think a Cobb County team can ever win a state championship. And Cedar Shoals offered me that position. I applied as a joke. One of my coaches said, "Yeah, Cedar Shoals job's open. Won't you apply?" And I did. I thought no way I would get it. But the principal had been at Marietta when we had upset them. And so I wound up getting the job, really because nobody else wanted it, because they'd had to forfeit every game the year before, and it was a mess. But I did it because I thought my chances of winning the state championship would be better at Cedar Shoals than they would be at Walton. And, Cobb County didn't win a state championship for like 30 years, I think, until finally, I think maybe Altoona or somebody did. But, again, it was probably a stupid decision. And one of the hardest things I ever did, telling those young men that I was leaving. But I was driven to win a state championship. That was my goal. And I just thought I had a better chance at Cedar Shoals because I knew they had some really good players.
Well, how did things go at Cedar Shoals? You were there for, 4 or 5 years?
I was there for 4.
4?
And, Chris, if I had have been a better coach, my first year there, we probably would have won a state championship. We were extremely talented, just really good. And we got upset by Clark Central not upset, but we got beat by Clark Central. That was a huge rivalry in the opening game. And I went for 2. We scored with a minute and a half left and made it 21-20. And I went for 2, and we didn't make it, just an inch. And we actually blocked the punt, got the ball back, ran it down inside the 5, and they called us for holding. And so it was at Clark Central, by the way. We wound up going 9-1, and won our first, beat Brookwood in the first playoff game, and then had to go play Southwest DeKalb in the second round down there. And we had 7 turnovers and got beat, I think, 14-10, and had a touchdown called back late. Just felt if we'd have got past that game, we would have had a chance. Southwest DeKalb went all the way to the state championship game that year and got beat by Valdosta. But I just wasn't a good enough coach. And my staff, I wasn't a good enough coach to get my staff where they needed to be. And, we weren't as sound as we needed to be in some areas. And, so we didn't do it. My second and third year, talent was down a little bit. But my 4th year there, we had another really good football team. And we cruised through the regular season. And we lost at Valdosta. That was our only loss that year. And we lost at Valdosta, and it was 14-10. They scored very, very late. And, got some, they practically mugged our defensive end the whole last drive, and it was all on their sideline.
Tyler Reddick here from 2311 Racing. Another checkered flag for the books. Time to celebrate with Chumba. Jump in at ChumbaCasino.com. Let's Chumba.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. See T&Cs. 21 plus. Sponsored by Chumba Casino.
I remember asking Coach Hyder after the game, I said, Coach, that last drive, I think it was like a 15-play drive. I said, Coach, you ran like every play to your sideline. I said, were we lined up wrong? What was it, some personnel thing? He looked at me, kind of smiled. He said, no, Jeff, he goes, I just think that referee on our sideline's a lot less likely to call something than the one on your. And I took that with me in my career, because if it ever got nut cutting time, we were going to run it into our sideline. But anyway, we're 9-1, and we don't play exceptionally well the first round, and got a tough opponent. We got beat by South Gwinnett, 24-21, and threw a pass on 4th and goal, and hit the kid in the end zone in the hands. And he was a freshman, great player, great kid. But he dropped it, and would have won the game with about 20 seconds to go. And they go on and play Dunwoody for the state championship a few weeks later. So we didn't get it done, but we had some good years. And those kids, the Walton kids, Walton was a very East Cobb back in those days, extremely, extremely rich. All the kids they were all driving Mercedes to school, and stuff. And you go to Cedar Shoals now, it's a different animal. And, I probably related to those kids even better. They needed football. They needed us as coaches. And I really enjoyed that aspect of it. But, and I know you're going to ask me why I left there, but I didn't get along real well with my principal there, and it just kind of wore on me. And after 4 years, I got offered a job back in my home, not in my hometown, but very close in Virginia, and was going to do that. And actually accepted the job, moved up there. We rented a house. I taught summer school, took them to camp that summer. But anyway, long story short, they had promised my wife a teaching job. She was a teacher too. And I told them, I said, we can't do it unless we both have jobs. We've got 3 kids already. We can't do it. They said, no problem. Well, the athletic director that was in on the interview was one of my friends from college. He left, took a basketball job in Northern Virginia. The principal that was in on the interview had a heart attack, retired. And the only person left was the superintendent. And he denied ever promising my wife a job when it came down to it. And so we went round and round, and, I was so frustrated because, the man had lied to me, and I just couldn't get over that. Well, Jimmy had called me that summer, and Trip Allen, who was his secondary coach, had left. And Jimmy, he said, look, I know, I'd been telling Jim, we talk about it every day. I, told him what was going on. He said, look, he said, Mr. Williams, our principal, said, if you and Inca want to come back, we'll give you both jobs. And so I went in and told the superintendent, I said, look, you promised my wife a job. If you don't come through, I'm leaving. And he said, well, he goes, I didn't promise, we didn't say that. And I said, you did say that. So the next day he called me and told me she had a halftime job. And I said, that ain't what you promised. And I said, I'm going to give you till tomorrow. Well, the next day he said, well, that's the best we can do. And so I called Jimmy and said, Jimmy, I'm coming back. And so I left without ever coaching a game at that school in Virginia, and came back to McEachern.
It's been a common theme that administration is key.
Well, yes. And Chris, I'll say this, just to throw it out there, but about 3 months later, the superintendent was fired for misappropriating money, and they ran him out of town. And their school board, called me up and said, look, we can't do anything else, but if you will tell us how much money it costs you to move, we'll pay you. So, at least that vindicated the fact that, the guy was, not what he said he was. And, but again, good Lord was looking out for me. There was a reason all that happened. And, it hurt my parents because they were excited that we were moving there and, going to be that close to them. But I told them, I can remember having the conversation. I said, guys, I can't do it. I said, I'm going back to Georgia. And it broke their hearts a little bit. But I will say this, from that point on, my mom basically moved to Georgia, and my dad would come back and forth. And, my mom came and kind of raised our two youngest kids, while we were teaching. So that part worked out pretty good for us.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's one of the problems I've had my whole career is that I take people at their word so much that any deviation from that, I can't process. If you say you're going to do something, do it. Do your dead level best to do what you say you're going to do. If you can't do it, just say you can't do it.
Yeah. Well,
I can't. I have a hard time. It's part of my autism. I can't process it. I just can't.
Well, nobody likes to be misled. And, I told them in the interview process, I said, we're going to take a pay cut coming from Georgia here. I said, and that's okay. I said, but my wife has to have a job. I mean, we talked about it, and then he denied it. And, I found out later that somebody they thought was going to retire didn't retire. And it was a small school system. And
right.
I guess have a lot of room. But anyway, it worked out okay.
Yeah, I'd say so. So after the year back with Coach Dorsey, is that when you took the Oconee County job?
One more school there. I had a blast that year in football season. I really enjoyed being an assistant. I wasn't a coordinator. I was just a position coach, and I loved it. We were living on campus in a house on McEachern's campus. And I could have stayed there the rest of my life, I think. But my wife, we had lived in two rental houses, back to back, and she wanted to get a house. So we had a house. We found a lot in Paulding County and built a house, and it was about 20 minutes from McEachern. Well, when the year was over, the regular season, the playoffs were over. Honestly, I got bored, because as a head coach, you do so much stuff in December and January and February, that it's just constant things going on. And I had gotten used to that. And all of a sudden, as an assistant, I wasn't doing anything. And so I got bored, and the Wheeler job came open, and they offered that to me. And it was a really good job. It was a really good place to be. And I did it for 2 years. The only problem was, Chris, that, we were living in Paulding County. And from where we lived in Herron to Wheeler, the best I ever made it at 4:00 in the morning one time was 45 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And, it was taking me an hour or more, coming and going. And we had three young kids. And literally those 2 years, I didn't see them. I would, when I was at Cedar Shoals or McEachern, we were always close to the school, and I would go home, get the kids, take them back, watch track meet, watch a basketball game, whatever. But I couldn't do that at Wheeler, and I had to stay and watch basketball. I had to go to track meets. I had to go to baseball games. That's what you do. But I couldn't do it with my kids. And it really wore on me, and it wore on my wife, because I was leaving before any of them got up. And I'd get home and they would be in bed. And the Oconee County job came open. And we had lived in Oconee when we had been at Cedar Shoals. So I knew it was a great place to live. And, I didn't know a lot about the school. They weren't very good in football. And, when I went and talked to them, I kind of got the feeling that they really didn't care, but I told my wife, I said, we're going to make this move because of family.
How to have fun anytime, anywhere. Step 1, go to ChumbaCasino.com.
ChumbaCasino.com. Got it.
Step 2, collect your welcome bonus.
Come to Papa welcome bonus.
Step 3, play hundreds of casino-style games for free.
That's a lot of games, all for free?
Step 4, unleash your excitement.
Woohoo! Chumba Casino has been delivering thrills for over a decade. So claim your free welcome bonus now and live the Chumba life. Visit ChumbaCasino.com.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
I've made every other move because of football. We're going to make this move because of family. And again, I guess the good Lord looking out for me. It turned out to be one of the best moves ever for me. And, we moved there, and I guess my first season was 97. I was at Oconee 97, 98, and 99. And, first year, they had won 8 games in the previous 4 years total. And the first year we went 8-4. And I still don't know how, but we put the wing tee in. They took to it. It was really good. We played a real aggressive style of defense, and somehow we wound up winning 8 games, getting beat by Marist and Coach Chadwick actually in the second round. And next year we go 10-2. We lost to Stevens County in the regular season and won our first playoff game, and then got beat in the second round again at Dalton. But the third year kind of all came together, and we had a really good team and wound up going 15-0 and winning it all that third year in 99.
Yeah, I remember that. I remember sitting up there at the semifinal game in the Dome and watching that game and watching you guys. And I'm sure you've heard this a lot, but I remember they put you picture you up there, and I was like, man, what is he, like 35? And everybody just started making fun of me. They're like, no, Coach Herron's a little bit older than that. He's got good genes, man. He doesn't age.
Well, actually, I was 39 that year, so you weren't too far off.
Yeah, but you've always looked like you were 35, Coach.
I don't anymore, Chris. I can promise you. But yeah, that game we played Cairo, and that was a tough one. Our quarterback was Clayton Matthews. He was our quarterback. He was our punter. He was our kicker. Just a great young man and a great player. His dad was one of Georgia's coaches, and Clayton was really good. Well, the week before, we had played Woodward Academy in the third round, and Clayton kicks off. We're ahead late in the game. I mean, the game's over. But we kick off, and I had put a bunch of backups in on the kickoff team thinking Clayton would kick it in the end zone. Well, it didn't go in the end zone. And they break it. They had a kid that went to Delaware, I think, and he broke the kickoff, and Clayton's trying to run him down and dove and caught his finger in the kid's shoelace and broke it, and a dislocated fracture or something, but it's, sticking out of the skin sideways and blood squirting out everywhere. And so he couldn't play in the semis. They told him he could kick, couldn't punt, and couldn't play quarterback. And so we go in there with a sophomore backup, and, he did really well. The young man did, but it wasn't Clayton. And, it was a tight game. I think we won it like 17-7 maybe. And, but we got Clayton back for the state championship game. His dad, being a Georgia coach, I think they numbed him up and taped it up, and who knows what all they did to him. But he was able to play, and that was a fun night for sure.
So after Oconee County, we head south, right?
We did. I was very happy at Oconee. My family was happy, and my coaching staff there, who I'm still extremely close to. We have a text chain that this weekend there must have been 1,000 text messages sent between us all. They're all great guys, but they were the lowest paid coaching staff in our region, and it was driving me crazy. And I kept going to the administration saying, look, we need to do something about this. Well, so we win it all. And my AD comes in. He's a good friend of mine and, great guy. He comes to me and says, Jeff, he said, look, they're going to give your staff a raise. And I said, well, John, that's great. They need it. They deserve it. And he goes, well, here's the problem, though. He goes, they're going to take it out of the playoff proceeds. And that's the money they're going to use to give them a raise. And I looked at him. I said, John, if that happens, what happens if we don't go that far next year? Are they going to lose it? He said, I don't know. Well, I was upset about that. And I had gotten a call to come and interview at Carrollton. Ben Scott had just passed away. And so I went and talked to them. But, during the interview, they were really nice. But, they wanted somebody to come in and not change anything. They wanted just to continue what Ben had done. And I understood it. I just didn't think it was possible. And so I just, I wasn't interested, told them that during the interview once, I found all that out. So I came back. I was ready to stay at Oconee County, but I get a letter a couple of days later. It was in my mailbox and was from our superintendent, and he was an acting superintendent. And I found out later he had some serious health issues, and maybe that had something to do with it. But it was a really scathing letter about me going and interviewing someplace where he thought I had agreed to stay there because they gave our assistants a raise. And it really upset me. I'm not going to lie. In fact, I still have it. I've never gotten rid of it because I was so upset when I read it and some of the things he said and things. So anyway, I called my wife that day and I said, look, I don't know if we're going to go to Carrollton, but we're going somewhere. And I said, I'm not staying here now. And literally the next day, I get an envelope in the mail, and it was from Camden County. And I found out later the AD at Camden had sent it to everybody that had played in the state championships. And it was, telling about the school and, all the things they had to offer and where it was at and everything. So I told my wife, I said, look, let's go see. I said, it's on the, they got a beach, let's go. Found out they really didn't have a beach in Camden, but just a river. But I said, we'll have a good time. We'll just go see. And we drove down, and I was just so impressed. The stadium, when I pulled up to the stadium, I probably would have paid them to coach here because it was this huge, everything they said during the interview process, all the things that I'd had to fight so hard for at Oconee County, like getting kids in the weight room and getting the coaches money and, all that. It was just night and day difference. And so, I really didn't want to go. I really didn't want to go. And I don't think my wife did either, but we decided to make the move. And we all together, I guess we were here for 16 years.
16 fantastic years.
Well, I wouldn't say that.
Well, not every year was great, but most of them were pretty freaking good, Coach.
15 of them were. One of them, the first year back, that second go around didn't go like I planned.
Well, it was fun to watch. I remember watching. Buddy of mine was a cheerleading coach there, Tammy Canali, and I remember we made fun of her so bad. Y'all were playing in the dome, and they were like the first cheerleading team to have the great big sign or whatever, and y'all are getting ready to come out, and y'all got 400 cheerleaders, and they whooped the sign up. It was upside down. It didn't matter. Y'all ran through it and beat the bejesus out of whoever y'all were playing and won the state championship that year. But it was fun to watch and did that. So after your run at Camden, where did you go after that?
Well, in 2012, I'd been at Camden for 13 years, and we'd had a lot of success. And honestly, Chris, people have asked me this before, why'd you leave? And the best answer I could probably give you was I got bored. We did the same things every week, every day. Okay, we did this last year. We got to do this, and it just, I don't know. After a period of time, I just kind of got bored with it. And the people in our community, I love. They're great. But, we all got to the point where, if we got beat in the third round, which we did in 2012, everybody, me included, thought it was a failure. And I just kind of, between that and the boredom of just the repetitions doing the same thing all the time, I just kind of thought I wanted to do something different. And I got offered a job at Knox Catholic High School in Tennessee. I don't know if I've ever even said that out loud to anybody. And I was ready to go. And I just, my wife's from Tennessee, her family and stuff. It was closer to my parents. And, I thought, well, this is a good move. And my kids did not want to do it. My two sons were just adamant they didn't want to go. And I guess the last minute, good Lord talked me out of it, and I turned it down. Well, about 2 weeks go by, and the job at Prince Avenue Christian came open again in Oconee County. And, Prince was good. And I sent the athletic director an email. I really didn't know I was serious, whatever. But I went and talked to him. I loved it. It was a very small school. It was a private Christian school. And it was totally different, than coaching at, 7A, whatever at the time, Camden. And I thought this could be nice. And I did that for 3 years and really loved it. It was one of the best experiences of my life. But I got frustrated because we couldn't beat Eagles Landing Christian. And I guess we lost them 3 years in a row in the playoffs. And, it was tough because I felt like they probably had more resources. They had more students. They had more athletes. They had more financial aid. And I talked to our administration about it. And, I didn't think they wanted really to change anything. And in the meantime, I got called by Grayson. And they wanted me to come and talk with them. And, I'm sitting there thinking, well, I thought I was just going to ride off into the sunset here at Prince Avenue. But maybe I need to jump back up on that bull and try to hang on for 8 more seconds, And so I literally turned that Grayson job down 3 times. One of the times because they told me they didn't want to run the wing T. And I was like, well, I ain't your guy, But then they convinced me, the players that they had, and we could run pretty much anything, we'd probably be okay. But I didn't think it was a good fit. But I knew that they had a really good chance to win the state championship. And once again, that appealed to me. And so I went there in 2016. And, it was a tough year. There had been some guys move in that were seniors. They had some guys move in when they were 9th graders. And then you had the guys that had been there all their life. And it was almost like 3 separate teams. And it was really the 9th game of the year, the 9th game of the year. We went to Hoover, Alabama, played on ESPN. And that was the first game that year that I felt like they really cared about winning and cared about playing with each other. Then the playoffs started, it continued, and we wound up winning it all. Had a great team. But it was a difficult job. Just going back from Prince Avenue back into that big of a fire, it was a tough year. But I guess ended all's well that ends well, I guess. So that summed up my Georgia stuff there. And I wasn't sure. I told my wife at Christmas that I was going to retire. I said, look, I'm because this was a tough year. We won it. I think it's the right time. I'm going to get out of it. So I had kind of made up my mind at Christmas I was going to quit. And when we got back in school, the kids were getting after it in the weight room. The younger kids, I kind of felt like were more mine. And so I about decided I was going to stay. And I got a call from T.L. Hanna in South Carolina. And the principal and the superintendent at T.L. Hanna were retired Georgia guys. And they asked me to come talk with them, and I did, and just fell in love with the place. And so I went over there for 2 years, and we had 2 really good years. They had struggled, and get there, and heck, the first year we go 11-1 and get beat in the second round by a team we had beaten 42-3 in the regular season. That wasn't fun. But the next year we made it to the state championship game and went 14-1. But unfortunately got beat by Dutch Fork in the state championship game. So after that, I found out during that season, the last year in South Carolina at Hanna in 18, I found out that there was a strong possibility that I had prostate cancer. And so when the season was over, I went through spring practice, was doing everything, and I was still having some symptoms, and I was kind of, I was worried, I can't lie. And so I told my wife, I said, I think I need to get out, let's travel, let's do some things here. I don't know what's going to happen with my health. And so I literally, I retired again and did not coach anywhere in 2019.
What was the prognosis? I mean, how did all of that work out?
Well, like I said, didn't coach in 2019, but I was kind of miserable. I was bored. I went to 9 different high school games that season just to watch. But in the fall, I don't know, sometime in October, I was diagnosed for sure with prostate cancer. And, it had gotten pretty bad, which was frustrating because I'd gone in a year before and, 6 months appointment, still having symptoms. Guy says, well, and I think you're okay. We'll see you in 6 more months. Well, 6 more months, it was full blown. And so I wound up having to have surgery in December. And then they told me that I was going to have to go through radiation treatments. So that January, a job came open at Tennessee Tech. We had a house in Tennessee that, our kind of plan was to always move back there. And I told my wife, I said, I might have to go through this radiation. There's a cancer center right beside Tennessee Tech's campus. And I said, I think I would be better off if I was coaching and not sitting around worried about it. And so, I got back in it at Tennessee Tech. And unfortunately, a couple months later, COVID hit. And so it was a really strange experience coaching during COVID. We couldn't go out on the road recruiting, anything like that. But I did my radiation and, thought everything was good. But after 2 years of the college stuff and, really it was a year and a half when it was all said and done. But, I missed being a head coach, and the Camden job came open again, and they called and said, look, you interested in coming back? And, I thought, well, if I'm going to do this, I believe I'd rather be a head coach again. And so in 2021, I coached in the spring at Tennessee Tech. We had 7 games because of COVID. We had a spring season. And I told them, I said, I can't leave until our season's over. And so I finished the season at Tennessee Tech, and we got home on a Saturday night, and on Sunday morning I was driving to Camden to come back for my second stint.
And as you said, that didn't go too good.
Well,
Tyler Reddick here from 2311 Racing. Victory Lane? Yeah, it's even better with Chumba by my side. Race to ChumbaCasino.com. Let's Chumba.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. See T&Cs. 21 plus. Sponsored by Chumba Casino.
That 2021, it was a tough year. That summer, I was having some more symptoms again. And so it wound up, my cancer had returned. It had spread and what they call metastasized. And, they told me, said, well, unfortunately, when that happens, they said, we can't cure you. He said, we can treat it, and we got a lot of ways to treat it, but we can't ever cure it once it spreads. And, that was just, that happened about the 3rd week of the season, I guess. And, I wound up, I had 6 surgical procedures during the season. And I, was on all kinds of medication, everything else. And it was really a struggle for me physically and mentally. And I think our kids and our coaches, it wore on them. They didn't know all the details, but they knew something was up. And, we wound up going 4-7 and my only losing season as a head coach. But we survived it. The treatments that they were doing started working, and I have slowly improved and gotten better physically. When you have a cancer diagnosis, you don't ever get to relax. That's over with, because every time something on you hurts, you're scared to death. It's the cancer. So you don't get to relax, but I have improved, and, all my stuff's been good in the last 2 years. And we got, the second year at Camden, we went 8 games, won a home playoff game for the first time since I'd left. We won a home playoff game. And then the next year, my last year, we made it to the semifinals. And ironically, my last game coaching was at Raider Valley against Walton, and that had been where my first game as a head coach had occurred. So kind of made a full circle there, and we got beat in the semis, but certainly felt like we did turn it around. Took 3 years, but we got it done.
Let me ask you this: for somebody that's had just the level of success that you've had at so many different places, your philosophy. I mean, there's obviously a method to the madness. I mean, when you go in somewhere, what do you do? I mean, I know each situation is different, but you must have a blueprint that you use to go in and say, all right, we got to do this first. We got to get this right. And then the next step is this. What is that for you?
Chris, you probably know that already. I know, because you worked with some guys that I worked with, and I never deviated from the plan. I mean, it was always the same that, we were going to try to be great on defense and special teams. We weren't going to beat ourselves offensively. But I always tell guys that when you become a head coach, the most important thing you've got to do is you got to win the kids over. And once you've won the kids over, then you start working on your staff. And once you got your staff halfway, on your side, then you reach out to the faculty and the community. But it's got to start with those young men, and you've got to get them believing. Football's not a very complicated game. It's just that some people believe they're really good at it and some people don't. And if you can get them to think they are, if you can get them to play better than they think they can, to play for each other, then I think you can have success. So, I don't know. I mean, my philosophy, I've done different things on defense, and I've actually done some different things on offense. A lot of people don't want to believe that, but we always tweaked what we were doing based on our personnel. But I was a very, I believed in a strong running game. I believed in controlling the clock, and I believed you had to run the ball and you had to stop the run to be successful. And I still believe those things, and I still think that's true even in the NFL, college, whatever. The game's changed, and everybody thinks, you got to throw it around every play or whatever. But when it comes down to it, this time of year, always in the playoffs in high school football, and the weather's not great, I think it still comes down to who can run the ball the best and who can stop the run the best. And so that was kind of my football philosophy. But my overall philosophy, and like anything else, I tried to treat the kids right. I try to earn their respect. They didn't necessarily like me, but I felt like, if I did things right, I could get them to respect me. And, hire good coaches, let them coach, and, just do the right things. But, people talk about culture and all this, but, we worked hard. I don't know really what culture is, but I knew we worked hard. I put a lot of demands on our players and our coaches, but I expected a lot out of them. I expected a lot out of myself. And, I think, you do that, kids notice it. I thought our weight room, I learned early on that the quickest way to success was to get better in the weight room. So we always really believed in that. And, it was a formula that worked well for us.
What are some things, as somebody that coached for 4 decades in the state of Georgia, you've seen, God knows, you've probably forgotten more than most people have seen. What are some things you've seen change with the game in the state of Georgia at the high school level that you just ain't really a big fan of?
Well, for about 37 of those years, probably, I didn't see much that bothered me. But, here lately, Chris, the transfers, the kids and families moving, and, I always felt like at at Camden County and other places I coached back in the day. But I felt like at Camden County that our kids played for our school. They played for our community. They played for their families. It meant something to play for Camden County. I felt like in Metro Atlanta when I was up there, later in my career that, you saw kids move around a whole lot more, and it wasn't necessarily about playing for their hometown. And even when I was at Grayson, I didn't feel like some of our kids had any allegiance to the community of Grayson. And that bothered me. But unfortunately, it has become the way of football. And it's not just high school, it's college too these days. And, high school kids see all the transfers in college, and all of a sudden, that's become the in vogue thing to do. And I mean, you can go on social media and you'll see kids posting about, I'm taking my talents to this so-and-so school, next year. I miss the days where, the community you grew up in, the friends you had from elementary school on up, those are the guys you lived and died with on Friday nights. And that's the way it was for me in my hometown. And, I miss those days. And we had that for a long time at Camden County. But, it's changed. It's changed at Camden County. And, there's kids move in and kids move out. And it's just parents have become more mobile. And again, I get the fact that every parent wants what's best for their kid. I understand that. But I heard Nick Saban say on his podcast there I listened to a few days ago that, NFL coaches were complaining to him about kids now and saying, they don't know how to face adversity. If something don't go right, they don't know how to handle it. And Coach Saban said, yeah, it happens to them in college. They just leave and go somewhere else. And, when I was coaching in Gwinnett County, that was the thing that really drove me nuts is that, if a kid wasn't starting for us, they were trying to transfer. There wasn't no, I'm a backup this year, but next year will be my turn, whatever. That's the biggest change I see. Kids can move and change schools. And, I'm not saying it's always a bad thing. My kids moved because I changed jobs. But I think growing up and playing for your hometown and your community, I miss it. Now, I don't mean that don't make it right, but I will say that I think that's the biggest change in high school football, and I miss it. And the skill level has changed drastically. Guys that played when I first started, people weren't great at throwing the ball. You didn't do it all summer and all those things. Now, kids have gotten bigger, faster, stronger, and I think, their hand-eye coordination has gotten better. It's a whole lot better than back when I played.
All right, now my favorite question. My favorite question to ask the legends, and some of y'all don't like it, but I don't care. I'm going to ask it anyway. Who were some of your favorite coaches to compete against, whether it was you just enjoyed beating the snot out of them or you just enjoyed competing against them because they were your buddies and like guys that you just enjoyed coaching against over the years?
Well, my answer is easy because it was always the guys that I had looked up to and admired and idolized when I was a young coach before I became a head coach. When I went to Cedar Shoals, one of the best things that ever happened to me in my entire career was I had to compete with Billy Henderson. And
that's awesome.
If there's young guys out there that don't know who Billy Henderson is, he's got some books out that he wrote that you need to read one of them. His story is unbelievable. He was a star football player at Georgia. He played in a Connie Mack league or something team and was coached by Babe Ruth at one point. But Billy Henderson was absolutely the best I had ever seen at promoting a program. And Clark Central and Cedar Shoals are about 5 miles apart. Every day was a competition. Every day. And Billy was kicking my rear end left and right. But I loved the man because after I realized, that I could learn so much from him, he started teaching me. And I'd go with him when we would play ninth grade and JV. I would go and sit with him, and he would have a notepad, and he would be writing down stuff that needed to be fixed. And I said, Coach, what are you writing down there? He said, Jeff, he goes, well, this kid's shirt tail's hanging out. They're not going to the bench when they come off the field like they're supposed to. This, little things. But I learned so much from Coach Henderson. Now, he beat us twice. We beat him twice. It was 2-2 those 4 years. But the education I got being around that man was, priceless. And, I competed against Nick Hyder twice. Lost both of those, by the way. But Nick was Coach Hyder. I can't call him Nick. I would never do that. Coach Hyder was a phenomenal human being. And, going to Valdosta and playing back in those days, man, that was something. And I really enjoyed that. And, I coached against Coach Chadwick, and that was a lesson learned right there, too. So, it seemed like the ones I enjoyed the most were the ones that beat us, probably. But I just got to watch them, and I tried to learn from them. And, those were the ones that Randy McPherson, that's one that, when he was at Lowndes and I was at Camden, man, we had some great battles, but his kids always acted right. His coaches always acted right. And those are the ones that I liked, where you knew they were going to play hard, they're going to hit you in the mouth, but, they'd probably help you up off the ground after they knocked you down. When the game was over, the coaches went out and shook hands and hugged, and, you went on about your business. There wasn't no foolishness. And those are the ones that, Coach Henderson, Coach Hyder, Randy, I mean, there's others. There's a lot of us because I've competed against a lot of guys.
Yeah. Yes, you have.
Those were some of the ones that just jumped out at me as soon as you said it.
Well, besides your children, who are some of the guys that have gone on that have worked for you? Because now you've got your coaching tree that you're most proud of.
Well, there's a ton of them.
I know you can't. That puts you in a bad spot. But, I mean, you've had so many guys. You don't want to.
The last time that I think I counted it up, I had 28 guys as assistants that had become head coaches. It might have been a couple more now. But so I was very lucky. I don't say that like I did anything. I say it because I was very lucky to hire some really, really good people. And, Frank Stevens being one of them. I know you worked for Frank, and Frank no question, Frank's probably the hardest working coach I've ever had on my staff. And he was hard. He was hard to work with.
He's very intense.
I used to tell him, Frank, you're killing me. I said, man, I got to get up at 4:00 just to beat you to school, but I can't let you be the first one here. I said, sleep in or something. But he was relentless. That's the best word I could use to describe Frank in everything he did. But he's done a great job. A name we probably don't know, but George Quarles was an assistant of mine way, way back. And George wound up at Maryville High School in Tennessee and literally leads the nation in winning percentage for high school coaches. He has since gone on. He's actually coaching at Austin Peay now. And he wasn't with me a long time, but I knew he was special, and he did a phenomenal job. But there's so many. Byron Slack recently. Byron's doing a great job. Jason Tone, who replaced me. Jason's Lounge. Boy, you mentioned Milt Mill early. Jason was a Milt, guy. And Jason replaced me at T.L. Hanna. He was on my staff, replaced me there. He's done a phenomenal job. John Lindsay became a head coach, did a great job. Now has come back, and I know I'm leaving out several that have won championships. And I was very blessed during my career, Chris, to have excellent coaches. And we were at a place in Camden, especially at Camden, that we would lose a tremendous coach, but we could always hire another one. We had the resources, we had the facilities, we had a reputation, And, we'd lose great ones, and then we'd get some better ones, and I don't know if I'd say better, but, the drop-off wouldn't be too good because we had a really good pool of guys to choose from.
Well, Coach, it's been an honor and a privilege to get to talk to you, and just the getting to just sit here and listen to you tell your story, and I could sit here and listen to you tell stories about the wars and the battles and everything that you've done for coaches and the kids and the young men that you've affected, not just on the field but off the field, and the coaches that you've affected and the families and everything you've done for high school football, not only in the state of Georgia but in Tennessee, Virginia, South Carolina, just everywhere you've been. You've been a blessing to all of us, and I just really appreciate you taking the time to share that with us.
Well, Chris, that's awful nice of you to say it. But I do want to say this, that good Lord's blessed me. I didn't know what I was doing when I started, but I learned from a lot of people. I copied a lot of people. I studied a lot of people. And I was so fortunate that I always seemed to have really good players, and I always seemed to get lucky hiring coaches. And all the credit, any success I have had, you don't do anything in football by yourself. And having a great staff and having great players, that's why I'm getting to talk to you. It's not because of anything I did. It's because of what those kids and those other coaches did. And, I'd be remiss if I didn't say that. And I'm just so thankful that the good Lord put all those people in my life.
Well, Coach, I sure do appreciate you, and I appreciate you taking the time to talk with us.
No problem, Chris. I'm glad for the opportunity, and I've enjoyed talking to you.
Thanks, Coach.
Thank you.
Tyler Reddick here from 2311 Racing. Victory Lane? Yeah, it's even better with Chumba by my side. Race to ChumbaCasino.com. Let's Chumba.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. See T&Cs. 21+. Sponsored by Chumba Casino.
If you work in university maintenance, Grainger considers you an MVP because your playbook ensures your arena is always ready for tip-off. And Grainger is your trusted partner, offering the products you need all in one place, from HVAC and plumbing supplies to lighting and more. And all delivered with plenty of time left on the clock, so your team always gets the win. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, visit Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.